Welcome to another episode of Nutanix Weekly. And I'm your host, Phil Sellers. I'm the practice director for Modern Data Center here at XenTegra. We say modern data center because we don't have all that silly baggage of traditional infrastructure. We focus on modern hybrid cloud, and that just happens to be what we're talking about today. But, I can't have one of these solo, so I've got some great folks joining me. First up, Mr. Jaira Cox from Nutanix, a field CTO level employee, smart guy, and happy to have him here on the podcast with us as usual.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Philip.
I've also got former Nutanix employee, and I'm happy to say XenTegra solutions architect Chris Calhoun. Chris came to us how many months ago?
It was in October.
October. So yeah, he's at the 6 month mark, which means I can now send anything and everything your way, right? Like that's the mark, right?
Fully onboarded.
You hadn't been doing that already, or so you've been holding back on me?
Very true. Maybe. I guess next week we'll find out, right?
Bring on the pain. Yep.
Well, one, as always, want to say thank you for spending a few minutes with us. This podcast is one of the many different versions of content with context. Here at XenTegra, we like to bring our real world experiences to the content that we find online. And so today's episode, we're talking about multi-cloud again. So we're diving deeper. Last episode, we kind of did a compare and contrast between multiple clouds or multi-cloud. And so we want to dig a little deeper into this. And so we're reviewing a blog post from Nicholas Hollian, a worldwide field CTO at Nutanix. Did I butcher his name, Jaira? Can you help me out on that?
Really close. Holian. Yep, Nicholas Holian.
Okay,
Great
cool.
guy.
And so shout out to Nicholas. Thanks for posting this and the last blog post that we just reviewed. But yeah, it's titled Moving from Multiple Clouds to Multi-Cloud, 6 Steps to Creating a Modern Environment. And so I love this because we're all about modern data center. Hybrid multi-cloud is the epitome of modern data center, in my opinion. That's kind of what we're modeling everything that we do here at XenTegra around. And it's really about that cloud operating model. So do things scale? How do we protect it? All of those sorts of concepts. So as we kind of dive in on this, I'm curious, Jaira, as you're working with customers out there, are you having a lot of conversations around multi-cloud?
Wow, almost everyone, I would say.
Good.
It's certainly a frequent topic.
Yeah, and I guess, as we kind of approach this, recapping the last episode, I kind of talk a little bit about being a unwilling participant in multiple cloud. Merger and acquisition gives you that benefit, right? You get lots of things you inherit, but you didn't necessarily strategically plan for. So a lot of organizations end up in this multiple cloud world. How many are strategically planning for multi-cloud?
Strategically planning for multi-cloud, not enough, but we're trying to help.
Okay.
Good answer.
Well, then I think that's a really good thing for us to dig in on today. How do we strategically plan for that?
Yeah.
So, Chris, I know you're a former customer. You're also a former Nutanix solutions engineer. What were conversations like with your customers as they're looking at this sort of multiple cloud versus multi-cloud?
There definitely were several questions to be discussed. Obviously, trying to plan out a good strategy. That was a key takeaway from what you just said to me was, all right, what are we looking to accomplish? Is it just the idea of we don't want to be in the data center business anymore? Or is this a business decision so that we can be more agile, be more flexible? And that flexibility lends itself to, hey, let's don't just move workloads. Let's understand what we're looking to accomplish, because getting out of the data center business is not the right reason necessarily. It's understanding your business initiatives. I think that I've heard before in discussion with customers, the cloud is not a destination, it's an operating model.
Mhm.
And that's where Nutanix comes in and benefits as far as that operating model, the flexibility to know that you've got the agility to use your cloud spend in Azure, or use credits if you've got something working with AWS already, or just the benefit there of not having a single resource of contention to say, hey, we're putting all our eggs in a single cloud basket. That gives the business the flexibility. And like you said, mergers and acquisitions. There may be companies that you inherit, like you say, that may be all Azure, all AWS. So having that flexibility to me was the key determination that customers were initially, the strategy behind needed to be defined on that first to understand where the direction would go, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
I think back to my time kind of running teams, the silos that we've been breaking from a Nutanix perspective from the very beginning, right? Hyperconverged is about bringing those silos down. Those silos become even more pronounced when you're talking about multiple clouds because GCP is not the same as AWS, is not the same as Azure. They all have a very distinct way of approaching things. I think back to what it was like in the early day of blade servers. You had Cisco with their very network centric way of dealing with blade servers, and HPE and Dell over here with their very server based way of dealing with blades. AWS, Azure, and GCP, they all have their way of kind of approaching technology, taxonomy, all this other stuff that's cloudy, but not necessarily technical. And so there's the extra overhead and silos that pop up when we start talking about multiple clouds. Um, so what does the roadmap actually look like? Let's dig in on that. I'm going to go over these step by step, and I'm going to throw it to you guys, and let's talk about each one of these. Step number one that Nicholas points out is gain a clear understanding of your current IT landscape and workloads. Um, I guess why is that important, Jira? I mean, doesn't sound that important to me, and I hope everyone listening gets a little bit of the sarcasm dripping there.
But bingo.
Yeah, I mean, I've never heard of any other strategy plan that starts with assess, right? How unique. Assess and inventory. But what is such a novel approach? But no, it's of course thoroughly appropriate, right? Because when it comes to that sort of like take inventory, understand landscape and workloads. Um, Remember, there's kind of like largely, if you zoom out, there's two buckets here, right? There's like IT governed workloads in
Mhm.
the cloud or clouds, plural. And there are, let's call it less than fully IT governed workloads in cloud or clouds, right? The previous episode, talked about, shadow IT, right? Like what
Mhm.
caused this situation that we find ourselves in as a starting point of being in multiple clouds, and how do we apply and go on a journey of a multi-cloud strategy, right? So understanding what's out there, yeah, I think it's absolutely key around uh, the Nicholas even points out one wonderful tact here of even like implementing amnesty, right? Like
Mhm.
this is the judgment free zone. You just be honest with us, right? What do you got in cloud?
Yeah.
Help us take a full accounting here is a really great approach, right? To say like we need to make the most fully informed decision we possibly can. So we need the best data set in order to do that.
Yeah, it's like you're not going to get in trouble. Like
Yeah.
it's safe. We're a safe space. Bring it in. And that is true. I mean, it is incredibly easy for our business users to go and swipe a credit card.
Mhm.
And I'm not picking on my marketing team because it's a great tool, but like Canva, I know my wife uses Canva, and I'm sure so many business users probably have a subscription. And so There are organizations who are paying for Canva, probably having it expensed and no
Mhm.
idea. But it's an
Well,
incredibly useful product to the business user.
and we have to reconcile our desires with the business users and the business desire, right? Because like nowhere on our project plan is break apps, right, or deny
Right.
users or reduce functionality, right? We're on a mission here to add governance, control costs, add strategy, add intentionality, while preserving app functionality, right?
Yeah,
So there's some I'll say synergy, overused word, but true. There's some aligned interests, right? In like the more I know about your apps and what you have deployed, the less likelihood we're going to break something here as we do this.
absolutely. I do feel like I need sound effects. So as you talk about shadow IT, I do feel like we need like a bum 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 kind of like sound effect to come after it. It sounds so scary. And I guess to a degree, when you're tasked with data governance, security, it could be very scary. Um, but really, I mean, this is our business constituents trying to get work done at the end of the day. And they're looking for the path of least resistance. And so I do kind of think back to the Phoenix Project and the land of no in security. And so when you become too tight and stringent and people can't get their job done, that induces some of this shadow IT experience. Um, it's definitely something important, but because it exists, your point's well taken. We need to know that it's out there. I
Yeah,
think it's actually really smart to talk about amnesty. Um, you know,
Absolutely.
it's interesting. I mean, that's usually a concept of other types of
yeah.
problems.
Well, and it's worth pointing out like this. We might have had a bit of a U.S. centric viewpoint there around like, oh, it's for cost control and governance, when in reality, like other parts of the world, knowing what you have in certain cloud deployments is simply a matter of compliance, right? And
Mhm.
could you be sued for where you've
Absolutely.
placed certain data, or is your business at risk? So it is critical to get this right. I can picture there is an alternate timeline where this podcast is not called the Phoenix Weekly. It's titled like ultimately everything ties back to Phoenix Project.
Very true. Well, Chris, you and I were on a phone call earlier today with a customer, and we were talking through things. And this particular customer was smarter than the average bear. Let's say it that way. Hey, boo boo. Um,
Mhm.
it- Definitely ahead of the curve, right? More technical
Absolutely.
than a lot of the folks. This shop was sharp. Um, I think when we talk to a customer like that, they may have a good handle on their inventory and things like that. But there are a lot of other shops that may not know. Like, what do you think the people add to that equation? Like the different IT teams, the different dynamics there.
Great question. And I'll say in a former life, I've had to deal with some of that amnesty in the sense that there would be app dev teams that would come to me and say, "Hey, I've set up a great application that I need you to help me with. I've got a problem." I said, "Sure. Uh, what's the login information?" "Oh, it's in Azure." "What? Excuse me? How did you?" Then it just kind of turns to a question of he holds his head down and says, "I had to get it done."
Mhm.
And that's the approach that I think that, like you said, there's a security aspect from an infrastructure for governance that can basically be a block for the business teams that have that pressure of we've got to deliver and we can't wait 2 weeks to get approval from an infrastructure team to fill out all of the paperwork, the check boxes, et cetera. But that's where then you've got to realize what am I putting the business and what type of situation am I putting the business in from a security aspect then if I do jump ahead
Yeah.
and haven't thought about that from full stack support model. And that's where I think that, like you said, the pressures and drivers are usually in the cases like this business demands.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily IT driven. If if IT shops had the opportunity to say, hey, let's stop all work and devote the next 2 weeks, we'll say 2 weeks generously, to providing you a safe space landing zone in cloud of choice, great, that would be fantastic. But the business can't stop.
Yeah.
And so that's where it's a struggle I see from my past life of being able to support those where, yeah, they had to get it done. They're looking to move something from their Azure personal account to, oh, now this is production. Whoa,
Yeah.
what do you mean production? It's not production ready. And
Yeah.
that's part of that assessment that we're kind of talking to now. And I think that that's really key in understanding how there is a beginning, middle, and end to a fully produced workload that has the right guardrails, governance, monitoring, effectiveness that often gets left out whenever
Mhm.
there's urgency and pressures and demands from the business.
Yeah, it reminds me of a conversation we had with another customer. They had a digital team. They were trying to get some portals and other things out. They spun that up in AWS and they let it go and they did, rudimentary things, but that's become a project to revisit to make sure that the governance is correct, to make sure the underpinning and security is all where it needs to be. But, that's the compromise. And I do think if anything from step one, that softer stance with your business partners and with your constituents is probably the overarching thing here. We need to know about it, so don't rule with the iron fist
Mhm.
and make sure that it's a safe space so that you can learn about all the different things that are in use in your environment.
I, maybe as a closing thought on that one is, but also remember you've got friends in accounting, right?
Mhm.
And maybe asking for, hey, where are reimbursements going? And is anything rhyming with AWS or Azure?
Yeah.
Can also be one last data point, right? To just sort of reconcile and say, do we think we found everything?
Honestly, I loved the folks that worked with us on expenses and reimbursements and stuff at my last organization. And so I'm sure Katie will never hear this podcast, but shout out to Katie because she was amazing. But yeah, I mean, they're a great resource for you. That is absolutely the case. Also, don't forget about your corporate logins. So Entra ID, Okta, things like that can be used for discovery because people have the ability to sign into all these SaaS platforms using their corporate credentials, not always requiring an app registration and things like that. Sometimes they just work. So a couple good tips, I think, from the real world. Step two, understand the tools and technology used in each silo. I talked a little bit about silos, but I guess how does this affect things? Jair, I'll throw it to you.
So I think like Chris and I both said separately, like, the goal here is not to uh, impact the business. In fact, the goal is definitely to do very much the opposite, right? And so, in that vein, understanding people's processes and tooling um, uh, is important, right? It's yet one more form of accounting to take, cast a wide net, understand who does what their process and what their tooling is. To do it, to be able to understand where do we go from here around what's proprietary, what is reusable, what's agnostic, um, is something done by a business unit? Is something done provided by a business unit, but done by a self-service, right? Understanding all these things lets us know uh, what kind of paths we need to pave to keep people functioning, right? And I'm actually reminded of all those maps we've seen on campuses or of those like paths of desire where people are walking here and killing the grass. Therefore, we should just put a path there to make that officially supported kind of well, path. I need a better word for path there, but supported process. Same thing applies here in the digital world as well.
Yeah, Chris, you were talking about this earlier, but all the different teams working differently, their different tools, that I think drives us to be more inquisitive, the land of why instead of the land of no, maybe.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an understanding of the direction that you're taking your business, as well as understanding how then the support model changes from an infrastructure perspective. Where in an old hat or past life of mine, um, here's a quick story and understanding about just, hey, once the decision was made to go, we'll say all AWS, for example, then that creates the silo, which is the discussion point around step number two is, okay, once once engineers start working in that world, in that land of AWS, their skills, their tooling there, and understanding of technology changes from a total cloud focused mindset in that, okay, in a past life, I had to go to a specific engineer that handled cloud versus the engineer that handled the on-prem environment. Because in a real world, you're not going to be able to just say, okay, let's turn the lights off on our on-prem environment and now it's just magically ready in the cloud and everybody is on the same level playing field from a tool set. So understanding that, and then um, the key differentiator too for me in the past was, okay, I've got the right internal contacts, but then what's the routing like for support? Who do you go to whenever there is a problem?
Mhm.
And I think that that's something too that, and again, infrastructure mindset of supporting large enterprise companies and as well as small companies. Okay, it's more hands off in the cloud model. You're relying on that cloud vendor. Usually it's submitting a ticket, an online process, but knowing that and then knowing the turnaround time, you then have to set expectations with the business of, okay, it's in their hands now. So
Yeah.
how do you go about setting up that infrastructure and that process, as Jaira mentioned? It's really a different mindset of understanding what's needed and the capabilities around that. So
Yeah, it definitely is a thing where you sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a moment, but you definitely start to train different standards and things. And so I think kind of flowing right into step number three here, standardizing your environments, your tools, your technology has a huge benefit for organizations. So, as you kind of talked about different toolings kind of creating silos. I think back to discussions that I had around should we use AMIs, Azure Machine definitions, and or should we try and do something that's more, dial tone across multiple things, leading us down the road of Kubernetes to kind of give us that equal playing field um, rather than things that were cloud specific. Um, I guess step three going here, I mean, what advice is out there for companies trying to standardize on their environments and tools?
Um, so, well, or even opportunities, right, to standardize, right? So like not leaving behind that opportunity to unify on approaches, right? Like perhaps offering like tiering of solutions of like, here's the recommended solution, other things are possible, right? That might have a bit less corporate IT support, and more of a self-service approach, but that getting to that final state quicker helps customers make those changes faster, right? Or really helps our customers make those changes faster. Say this is the recommended adoption path. Other things are possible in maybe more of a boutique fashion, but I guess to mix some metaphors here, looking across the arrows and saying we're going to put all of our weight behind this one arrow or this subset of arrows, right? And saying let's standardize here and encourage that has benefits. I have customers that as they move to Nutanix, they find that they are freeing up time in their day to day that they can then go meet with their business partners and say, "Hey, let's run a class for you on deploying via Terraform, right? Or how to use Ansible to manage workloads. Let's help you adopt next generation technology so that you can better govern and consume a next gen platform." When I lose my train of thought, one thing that's fun to say is, "Oh, what's the right word in English, but it doesn't work when you're not multilingual. So
Yeah, fair enough, right? My train of thought derailed completely there just a few minutes ago. Chris, so you've been through this, and so as you kind of started adopting cloud stuff inside of your organization in the past, you shared a little bit that you had certain specialists you had to go to, and it was different, and you may have known everybody on the inside, but then, now that it's a little cloudy, you may not know who or where things live. So, how does that kind of play out long term? What did you do to help solve that over time?
That was the key thing. You obviously said, hey, you know now who to go to in the certain respects of who owns what application, but you don't necessarily know where the applications live.
Mm.
So basically trying to work on a master, where does stuff live now in a period of transition? Is this an on-prem? Because obviously those are different resources to go to versus cloud. And that's really part of the, if I had hair, I would pull it out. But obviously, in the case, don't have that to worry about. But the case of, okay, what support model, what's the language that I speak whenever I speak Azure versus AWS versus on-prem, and understanding that. And that's where I can tell you it was very tough to understand where an application lives. There was early naming of on-prem systems that pretty much gave clear reference to that. But then that's also there's a difference in each VM being a specialist that you knew exactly where that little sweetheart lived, and that was based off of a naming system. Well, there's a difference in that in managing 5,000 VMs across the landscape and treating those differently than, okay, I'm not going to be able to know the names of every single one of those. So taking a different perspective, looking at a cattle versus a pet approach of hurting your VMs, knowing that, or we'll say cloud resources, not necessarily VMs in a Kubernetes world, but basically understanding that you do need to be more mindful, need to have more documentation in place to know where items live, because that's really the key to supporting this multi-cloud approach.
We talked a little bit about this earlier, I think, but where becomes your source of authority on where things live? I think about CMDBs. We've relied on those and ITIL processes in the past. We've had monitoring systems. We've had maybe vCenter in the past or Prism Central. Now where do you go to answer that question of what lives where? Kubernetes, these are not permanent workloads. They're very temporal workloads. And so, the naming is not going to match that little convention if they're automatically spun up by a Kubernetes control plane. So there are new problems that come up here. And I do think the point here around standardizing environments and tools and technologies has benefits. If Nutanix becomes your de facto standard, the fact that that same implementation, same software code base can run in any of these clouds offers you benefits. It's the same operating style. You don't train your team again. You have a very consistent way of interacting with each of these cloud destinations on the same stack. Kubernetes, very much the same. If you've got a Kubernetes stack in each of these destinations, then the whole conversation becomes more of a where's the right destination versus what is the right tool, what is the right cloud. It just becomes different pods of infrastructure in a geography. So we've got a number of more steps here, 6 steps. I don't think we're going to get through them all today, so we may have to break this into a part two because I like the discussion so much. I do want to continue talking about this because I think it's realistic problems that we're encountering. So before we wrap up, I do want to just kind of throw it back to both of you. I mean, as we think about tooling, as we think about that, where I don't know, Rolodex is not the right word. That Rosetta Stone of where things live. Thoughts on how people can approach that in a modern way?
That Library of Alexandria of where stuff is. I think it's so neat how in this blog post from a technology company, like the guidance to do a dramatic underservice of over summarization here is primarily talk to your people,
Mhm.
right? And lead well at the human level, in so many ways. Like there's tooling for a lot of stuff. There's benefits to centralizing on tool sets and standardizing and processes and so forth. But fundamentally, I think everything is a flavor of know your business, know your teams, know your counterparts elsewhere in the business, and work with them
Yeah,
and go farther together.
cooperate.
Yeah.
Yeah. There, obviously, in a technology stack, we'd like to have an app or some type of automation control this aspect of it. But more times than not, it's basically, hey, this certain person is in charge of all of app dev. Let's let them, it may not be a single point. It may be engage in those resources, exactly like you've mentioned, Jira and Philip, pointing out, hey, this is where you communicate and over communicate during times of change, whenever you are moving business initiatives to different infrastructure models. So definitely a time to focus on that and be intentful and have that purpose driven conversation with your customers and clients, both internally and externally.
And we unveiled a new mission statement at XenTegra earlier this year to engage, listen, and deliver enterprise solutions for all of our clients. And I love our new mission statement because that second action word is listen. And I think that comes across here. As a technologist, you need to listen so that when you're trying to make this transformation, that you're getting a feedback loop from others, that you're addressing any of their concerns. And so that listen phase, really important here too. That's what I also hear coming through is listen to those business constituents, your app dev folks, and kind of respond with that. So I think that's a great place for us to wrap up for this episode. I look forward to getting back together and delving deeper. But Jira, Chris, thanks so much for spending time with us. And for everyone listening, I want to say thanks for spending time with us as well. We'll talk to you on the next episode. Have a great day.